Sarah Mitchell pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of the general store. The wind had picked up considerably since morning, and dark clouds gathered overhead like an angry fist ready to strike. She clutched the small bag of flour and beans she had managed to purchase with her last few coins, knowing it would have to last her and her younger brother Tommy through the next week. The year was 1887, and the small town of Cedar Ridge had seen better days. What once was a thriving mining community had slowly withered as the silver deposits ran dry. Now only about 200 souls remained, most of them struggling to make ends meet. Sarah was no exception. Since their parents had died in a wagon accident 6 months ago, she had been working as a seamstress and taking in laundry to support herself and 12-year-old Tommy. As she walked down Main Street, Sarah noticed how the other townspeople seemed to avoid her gaze. It had been this way ever since the incident with Mayor Caldwell's son, James. 3 weeks ago, James had cornered her behind the church after Sunday service, demanding she accept his marriage proposal. When she refused, explaining that she did not love him and that he had been drinking heavily, James had become violent. He grabbed her wrist so hard it left bruises and threatened to ruin her reputation if she ever spoke against him. Sarah had done what any decent woman would do. She told the truth. She reported the incident to Sheriff Morrison and even showed him the bruises. But James Caldwell was the mayor's only son, and Mayor Caldwell was the wealthiest and most powerful man in Cedar Ridge. Within hours, James had convinced half the town that Sarah had tried to seduce him and then lied about it when he rejected her advances. The lies spread like wildfire through the small community. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, suddenly had no more rooms available when Sarah inquired about cheaper lodging. Mr. Peterson at the Mercantile began charging her double for basic supplies. Even Reverend Williams, who had known her family for years, started treating her with cold suspicion. Now, as the first snowflakes began to fall, Sarah hurried toward the small cabin she and Tommy rented on the outskirts of town. The wind howled through the bare trees, and she could feel the temperature dropping rapidly. Mountain weather was unpredictable, and this storm looked like it was going to be a big one. She was halfway home when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Turning, she saw James Caldwell riding toward her on his bay horse, flanked by 2 of his friends, Pete Rawlings and Dale Murphy. All 3 men had been drinking. She could tell by their flushed faces and the way they swayed in their saddles. Well, if it isn't the lying little seamstress," James called out, his words slurred. "Out for an evening stroll, Sarah? Hoping to catch another innocent man in your web of lies." Sarah quickened her pace, but the men easily kept up on horseback. "Leave me alone, James," she said firmly, though her heart was pounding. "I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, but I have something to say to you," James replied, dismounting his horse and blocking her path. "You see, my dear Sarah, your lies have been causing problems for my family. My father is up for re-election next month, and having a scandal attached to our name doesn't sit well with the voters." Pete and Dale had also dismounted now, forming a semicircle around her. Sarah looked around desperately, but the street was empty. Everyone was indoors preparing for the storm. "I never lied about anything," Sarah said, backing away slowly. "You know exactly what you did to me." James laughed coldly. What I did was show mercy to a desperate woman throwing herself at me. But since you seem determined to keep spreading your poison, I think it's time this town understood exactly what kind of woman you really are." The snow was falling harder now, and Sarah could barely see 10 feet in any direction. James stepped closer, and she caught the strong smell of whiskey on his breath. "Here's what's going to happen," James continued. "You're going to march back into town and tell everyone you lied about me. You're going to apologize publicly and admit that you tried to seduce me out of desperation." "I will not," Sarah said firmly. "Because it's not true." James's face darkened. "Then maybe we need to give you some motivation." He nodded at Pete and Dale, who began moving closer. Sarah turned and ran. Behind her, she heard James shouting orders to his friends, then the sound of running footsteps in the snow. She clutched her bag of supplies and ran as fast as she could, but her long skirts and the deepening snow made it difficult. She made it about a quarter mile before Pete caught up to her, grabbing her arm and spinning her around. "Not so fast, Sarah. Mr. Caldwell isn't finished talking to you. Let go of me." Sarah struggled against his grip, but Pete was much stronger. Dale arrived a moment later, followed by James, who was breathing hard from the chase. "I gave you a chance to do this the easy way," James panted. "But since you want to be difficult, we'll have to be more persuasive." The three men surrounded her again. Sarah looked around desperately, but they were now completely outside of town, with nothing but empty prairie and mountains in all directions. The snow was falling so heavily that she could barely make out the lights of Cedar Ridge behind them. "No one can see us out here," James said with an ugly smile. "No one can hear you scream. So I suggest you start thinking very carefully about your choices." Sarah's mind raced. She knew these men were capable of terrible things, especially when they had been drinking. But she also knew that giving in to their demands would only make things worse for her in the long run. "Please," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just let me go home, my brother. He's only 12. He needs me." "Should have thought about that before you decided to ruin my reputation," James replied. He reached into his coat and pulled out a length of rope. "Pete, Dale, hold her arms." Sarah screamed and struggled as the two men grabbed her, but her voice was swallowed by the howling wind. The storm was getting worse by the minute, and she realized that even if someone from town had heard her, they would never be able to find him in this weather. Just as Pete and Dale were forcing her to her knees in the snow, Sarah heard something that made her heart leap with hope, the sound of a horse approaching at a gallop. All four of them turned toward the sound, squinting through the swirling snow. A rider emerged from the white curtain of the blizzard like a ghost. He was a large man on a magnificent black stallion, wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the storm. Sarah had never seen him before, but something about his presence commanded immediate attention. The stranger reined in his horse about 20 feet away and surveyed the scene before him. Even through the snow and wind, Sarah could feel the intensity of his gaze. "Gentlemen," the stranger said, his voice carrying easily over the storm despite not being raised. "Seems like a poor night to be out socializing with a young lady, especially when that lady appears to be in distress." James straightened up, trying to assert his authority. "This is none of your business, stranger. This woman is a known troublemaker in our town. We're simply having a conversation with her." The stranger's horse shifted restlessly, and Sarah could see that its rider was studying James and his friends with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to measuring threats. "Is that so?" the stranger replied mildly. "Well, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to continue your conversation somewhere warmer. This storm is getting dangerous, and the lady needs to get a shelter." Pete spoke up, emboldened by James's presence. "Like Mr. Caldwell said, this ain't your concern. Why don't you just ride on and mind your own business?" The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, and Sarah immediately saw that he was even larger than he had appeared on horseback. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of handling difficult situations. "I'm making it my concern," he said simply. Dale, the youngest of James's friends, took a step forward. "There's 3 of us and one of you, mister. You might want to reconsider your position." The stranger smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Son, I appreciate the mathematics lesson, but I think you might be overlooking a few factors in your calculation." As he spoke, the stranger opened his heavy coat, and Sarah glimpsed something that made her breath catch. The worn wooden handles of what appeared to be 2 pistols, positioned for a cross draw. But more than that, there was something in the man's posture and the casual way he carried himself that spoke of experience with violence. James apparently saw it too, because his blustering tone became more uncertain. "Now look here, we don't want any trouble. This is a local matter, and you're obviously not from around here. You're right about that, the stranger agreed. I'm just passing through. Was hoping to find a room and a hot meal in your town, but this storm came up faster than expected. His eyes moved to Sarah, who was still kneeling in the snow where Pete and Dale had forced her down. Ma'am, are you hurt? Sarah found her voice at last. No, sir. But these men won't let me go home. The stranger nodded once, as if this confirmed everything he needed to know. I see. Well, gentlemen, here's how this is going to work. You're going to get on your horses and ride back to town. The lady and I will follow shortly, once I've made sure she's not injured. You can't order us around. Pete protested. This is our town. We don't take orders from drifters. The stranger's hand moved almost casually to rest on the grip of his right-hand pistol. Son, I've been polite so far because I believe in giving folks the benefit of the doubt. But my patience has limits, and this storm is getting worse by the minute. That young lady is going to freeze to death if we stand out here much longer debating jurisdiction. James looked from the stranger to his friends, clearly weighing his options. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. Was his pride worth risking a gunfight in a blizzard with a man who obviously knew how to handle himself? This isn't over, James finally said to Sarah. You still owe this town an apology, and you'll give it one way or another. I think it's over for tonight, the stranger replied calmly. And I'd suggest you boys hurry back to town before you lose your way in this storm. Mountain weather can turn deadly fast. Pete and Dale were already moving toward their horses, apparently having no desire to test the stranger's resolve. James hesitated a moment longer, his face twisted with anger and humiliation, then followed his friends. This isn't finished, he called back over his shoulder as they mounted up. A man like you won't always be around to interfere. The three men disappeared into the swirling snow, and suddenly, Sarah found herself alone with a mysterious stranger. She struggled to her feet, her legs shaking from cold and fear. Thank you, she said, her teeth chattering. I don't know what they would have done if you hadn't come along. The stranger was already removing his heavy coat. I have a pretty good idea what they had in mind, he replied grimly. And none of it would have ended well for you. He held out the coat. Put this on. You're half frozen. Sarah hesitated. I couldn't take your coat in this storm. You'll freeze. The man smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw genuine warmth in his expression. Ma'am, I've got 2 wool shirts under this coat, and I'm from Montana. This here's just a light snow shower compared to what I'm used to. Besides, my horse and I are both built for this kind of weather. You, on the other hand, are shaking like a leaf in a tornado. Sarah gratefully accepted the coat and immediately felt its warmth enveloping her. The garment was made of fine wool with a thick lining, and it smelled faintly of leather and pine smoke. More importantly, it was completely dry and cut the wind that had been slicing through her thin clothes. What's your name, ma'am? The stranger asked as he gathered the reins of his horse. Sarah Mitchell, she replied. And yours? Jack Morrison, he said. And before you ask, no relation to your local sheriff. It's a common name where I come from. As they began walking toward town, Sarah found herself studying her rescuer more closely. Jack Morrison was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair visible beneath his hat and weathered features that spoke of years spent outdoors. His clothes were well made, but practical, and everything about him suggested a man of substantial means who was comfortable in rough country. What brings you to Cedar Ridge, Mr. Morrison? Sarah asked as they struggled through the deepening snow. Business, he replied simply. I've got interests in mining and cattle, and I heard there might be opportunities in this area, though I'm starting to think I might have received some questionable information. Sarah couldn't help but laugh, despite everything that had happened. If you're looking for thriving mining operations, you definitely got bad information. The silver played out here months ago. Most of the mines are closed now. What about cattle? Jack asked. Seemed like good grazing country when I rode through this morning. It is, Sarah admitted. But most of the big ranchers moved their operations south when the mining boom ended. There's still some smaller spreads, but Nothing like what there used to be. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, fighting against the wind and snow. Sarah was amazed at how much difference the coat made. She was still cold, but no longer in danger of freezing. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Morrison?" she said finally. "Of course. Those men back there, James Caldwell is the mayor's son. He's used to getting his way in this town. You making an enemy of him could cause you problems." Jack glanced at her. "Are you warning me off, Miss Mitchell?" "No," Sarah said quickly. I want you to understand what you might be getting into. James has a lot of influence here, and he doesn't forget slights." "Neither do I," Jack replied quietly. "And I particularly don't forget when I see 3 grown men threatening a woman in a snowstorm." Sarah felt a warm flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the coat. It had been so long since anyone had stood up for her that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone in her corner. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about the situation." Jack was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "My mother raised me to believe that a man's character is measured by how he treats people who can't defend themselves. Those boys back there were planning something that would have hurt you, and I couldn't stand by and let that happen, even if it means trouble for you." "Especially then," Jack replied firmly. "Doing the right thing when it's convenient isn't really doing the right thing at all." By the time they reached the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, the storm had become a full blizzard. Snow was falling so heavily that Sarah could barely see the buildings ahead of them, and the wind was howling like a living thing. "Where's your house?" Jack shouted over the storm. Sarah pointed toward a small cabin barely visible through the snow. "There, the one with the yellow door." They struggled through the drifts, Jack's horse following patiently behind them. When they finally reached the cabin, Sarah fumbled with frozen fingers to open the door. "Tommy," she called as they stumbled inside. "Tommy, I'm home." A 12-year-old boy appeared from the back room, his face lighting up with relief when he saw his sister. "Sarah, I was so worried. The storm got so bad, and you were gone so long." Tommy stopped short when he noticed Jack standing behind his sister, snow melting from his hat and shoulders. "Tommy, this is Mr. Morrison," Sarah said, shrugging out of Jack's coat with reluctance. "He helped me get home safely in the storm." Tommy stepped forward and extended his hand with the serious manner of a boy trying to be grown up. "Thank you for helping my sister, sir. Would you like to stay until the storm passes? We don't have much, but you're welcome to share what we have." Jack shook the boy's hand solemnly. "I appreciate the offer, son, but I should get back to town and see about finding a room for the night." "You'll never make it in this weather," Sarah protested. "The storm's getting worse, and you could get lost between here and town. Please, stay until morning. It's the least I can do after what you did for me." Jack looked out the small window at the raging blizzard, then back at Sarah and Tommy. The cabin was small, but warm, with a good fire burning in the stone fireplace and the smell of something cooking on the wood stove. "I don't want to impose," he said finally. "It's not imposing," Sarah insisted. "It's practical. Besides, your horse needs shelter too, and we have a small barn out back." Jack nodded slowly. "In that case, I accept your hospitality, but I insist on contributing something to the household. I've got supplies in my saddlebags." While Jack went to tend to his horse, Sarah and Tommy prepared for their unexpected guest. Sarah put on a pot of coffee and checked the stew she had been cooking before her trip to town, while Tommy cleared space near the fire for their visitor to sleep. When Jack returned, he was carrying a leather saddlebag that he set on the kitchen table. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of bringing in some supplies." Sarah watched in amazement as Jack unpacked items from his bag: coffee, sugar, flour, dried beef, and even a small bag of peppermint candies. It was more food than she and Tommy usually saw in a month. "Mr. Morrison, this is too much," she protested. "We can't accept all this." "Sure you can," Jack replied easily. "I always travel with extra supplies, and I'd rather share them with good people than let them go to waste." As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself relaxing in Jack's presence. He was easy to talk to, with a quiet sense of humor and genuine interest in hearing about her and Tommy's life. He told them stories of his travels through Montana and Wyoming, of cattle drives and mining ventures, but he remained deliberately vague about his own background. Tommy was fascinated by Jack's tales of the frontier, asking countless questions about cowboys and Indians and wild animals. Jack answered each question patiently, and Sarah could see that he genuinely enjoyed the boy's enthusiasm. "Mr. Morrison," Tommy said as they sat around the fire after dinner, "are you a real cowboy?" Jack smiled. "Well, I've spent my share of time on horseback working cattle, so I suppose that makes me a cowboy of sorts." "Why do you ask?" "I want to be a cowboy when I grow up," Tommy said earnestly. "I want to have my own ranch and ride the range and everything." "That's a fine ambition," Jack replied seriously. "But being a cowboy isn't just about riding horses and looking tough. It's about hard work, responsibility, and taking care of the animals in your charge. Are you prepared for that kind of life?" Tommy nodded eagerly. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Sarah, and I work hard every day just to get by. I think I could handle being a cowboy." Jack glanced at Sarah, seeing the pride and sadness in her eyes as she watched her little brother. "I'm sure you could, son. You got the right attitude for it." As the night wore on and Tommy finally went to bed, Sarah and Jack found themselves alone by the fire. The storm continued to rage outside, but the cabin felt safe and warm. "Thank you again for what you did today," Sarah said quietly. "I shudder to think what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "You don't need to thank me," Jack replied. "Any decent man would have done the same thing." Sarah shook her head. "You'd be surprised how few decent men there are in this town. Most people here have turned their backs on me because of James Caldwell's lies." Jack studied her face in the firelight. "What kind of lies?" Sarah hesitated, then decided that this man who had risked himself for a stranger deserved to hear the truth. She told him the whole story: James's drunken proposal, his violent reaction to her refusal, and the campaign of lies and intimidation that had followed. Jack listened without interruption, his jaw tightening as the story progressed. When Sarah finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "How long has this been going on?" he asked finally. 3 weeks, Sarah replied. "It's gotten worse each day. People who have known me my whole life now treat me like I'm some kind of fallen woman. I'm afraid that soon Tommy and I won't be able to survive here anymore." "Where would you go?" Sarah shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. I have a cousin in Denver, but I don't have money for train tickets, and I can't leave Tommy behind to make the journey alone." Jack stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Mitchell, can I ask you something that might seem impertinent? After everything you've done for me today, I think you've earned the right to ask me anything. What would it take to prove that James Caldwell is lying about you? Is there any evidence? Any witnesses?" Sarah's heart sank. "That's the problem. It was just him and me behind the church. No one saw what really happened. And even if they had, James has most of the town convinced that I'm not trustworthy." "What about the bruises he left on your wrist?" "Sheriff Morrison saw them, but James convinced him that I must have done it to myself to support my story." Sarah's voice was bitter. Amazing how creative people can be when they want to believe a lie. Jack was quiet again, and Sarah could almost see the wheels turning in his mind. Finally, he looked at her directly. "Miss Mitchell, I want you to know that I believe your story completely. And I want you to know that you're not alone in this fight anymore." "What do you mean?" Jack's smile was grim. "I mean that James Caldwell picked the wrong woman to mess with this time. He just doesn't know it yet." Outside, the storm continued to howl, but inside the small cabin, Sarah Mitchell felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. She didn't know what Jack Morrison had in mind, but something in his voice told her that things in Cedar Ridge were about to change. As they finally settled down for the night, Sarah in her small bedroom, Tommy in the back room, and Jack on a bedroll by the fire, Sarah lay awake listening to the wind and thinking about the mysterious stranger who had appeared out of the blizzard like an answer to a prayer. She had no way of knowing that Jack Morrison was far more than just a passing traveler with a sense of justice. She couldn't know that his arrival in Cedar Ridge was not the coincidence it appeared to be, or that his interest in the local mining situation was connected to resources far greater than anyone in the struggling town could imagine. All Sarah knew was that for the first time in weeks, she felt protected, and as she drifted off to sleep with the warm scent of Jack's coat still lingering in the air around her, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, her long nightmare was finally coming to an end. Sarah woke to the sound of wood being chopped outside her cabin. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then, she remembered the events of the previous night. Jack Morrison, the stranger who had saved her from James Caldwell and his friends in the blizzard, had spent the night in her home. She dressed quickly and emerged from her bedroom to find Tommy already awake and looking out the window with wide eyes. "Sarah, come look at this," Tommy whispered excitedly. Sarah joined her brother at the window and gasped. Jack had not only chopped enough wood to fill their normally empty wood bin, but had also shoveled a clear path from their door to the barn and another path to the main road. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind nearly 2 feet of fresh snow, but their little property looked more organized and cared for than it had in months. "He's been working since before dawn," Tommy said with obvious admiration. "I woke up when I heard the axe, and when I looked out, he was already clearing the path to the barn. His horse is in there staying warm, and he gave it some of his own grain." Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. She and Tommy had offered Jack shelter for the night, but he was the one taking care of them. She quickly started a pot of coffee and began preparing breakfast with some of the supplies Jack had contributed the night before. When Jack came inside, stamping snow off his boots, Sarah noticed that despite his early morning labor, he looked fresh and alert. His clothes were clean, his hair was combed, and he had obviously taken time to shave using water he must have heated over the fire. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell, Tommy," he said with a smile. "Hope I didn't wake you folks with my chopping." "You didn't need to do all that work," Sarah protested, though she was secretly pleased by the sight of their well-stocked wood pile. Jack shrugged. "I'm an early riser by nature, and I like to keep busy. Besides, after your hospitality last night, it was the least I could do." Over breakfast, Jack asked careful questions about the town and its people. He was particularly interested in the business community, who had influence, and how the local economy functioned. Sarah found herself impressed by his keen understanding of small-town dynamics. "So Mayor Caldwell owns the bank as well as several of the remaining businesses?" Jack asked, cutting into the eggs Sarah had fried with bacon from his own supplies. "That's right," Sarah confirmed. When the mining started to decline, he was smart enough to diversify. He owns the hotel, the largest general store, and has interests in the grain elevator and the lumber mill. Most people in town owe him money in one form or another. Tommy piped up. "He also owns a lot of land around here. Pa used to say that Mayor Caldwell was buying up properties from folks who couldn't pay their debts." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "And Sheriff Morrison, he's an elected official?" "Yes, but the election isn't until next year," Sarah said. "He's a good man, I think, but he depends on Mayor Caldwell's support to stay in office. That's why he wouldn't pursue charges against James, even when I showed him the bruises." "What about the other businesses? Anyone in town who isn't beholden to the Caldwells?" Sarah considered the question. "Well, there's Doc Peterson. He owns his own practice and doesn't owe anyone anything. Mrs. Chun, who runs the laundry, has her own building. And there's Marcus Webb, who owns the livery stable. But none of them have real political influence." Jack finished his breakfast and leaned back in his chair. "Miss Mitchell, I hope you won't think me presumptuous, but I'd like to make you a proposition." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "What kind of proposition?" "A business proposition," Jack said quickly, apparently noticing her reaction. "I'm planning to stay in Cedar Ridge for a while to evaluate some opportunities. I'll need someone to do laundry, mending, and general domestic work. I'm prepared to pay well for reliable service." Sarah's heart leaped at the thought of steady income, but she forced herself to be cautious. "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate the offer, but you should know that hiring me might cause problems for you in this town. The Caldwells have made it clear that anyone who associates with me will face consequences. Jack's smile was cold. Let me worry about the Caldwells. The question is whether you're interested in the work. Of course I'm interested, but then it's settled. Jack interrupted. I'll pay you $15 a week, plus I'll cover any expenses for supplies you need. Sarah's jaw dropped. $15 a week was more than she usually made in a month. Mr. Morrison, that's far too much money for laundry and mending. Not the way I see it, Jack replied. Good work deserves good pay. Besides, I can afford it, and you clearly need the income. Tommy was grinning from ear to ear. Sarah, with that much money, we could fix the roof before next winter, and maybe buy some new clothes. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. For weeks, she had been watching their situation grow more desperate each day. Now, suddenly, a solution had literally appeared out of the storm. There is one condition, Jack continued. I want you to keep track of exactly who in this town treats you poorly because of your association with me. Names, dates, what they said or did. Can you do that? Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure why he wanted such information. Yes, I can do that. Excellent. Now, I need to ride into town and secure lodging. I also want to introduce myself to some of the local business owners. Would you mind if I told people that you're working for me? I don't mind, but I should warn you again that it will likely cause problems. Jack stood and reached for his coat. Miss Mitchell, let me tell you something about problems. I've found that the best way to deal with bullies is to face them head on. The more people who know you're under my protection, the safer you'll be. After Jack left for town, Sarah found herself humming as she went about her morning chores. For the first time in weeks, she felt hopeful about the future. She and Tommy spent the day organizing their small home and making plans for how to spend Sarah's new income. Meanwhile, Jack rode into Cedar Ridge with the unhurried confidence of a man who is comfortable in any situation. His first stop was the hotel, where he requested their best room for an extended stay. The desk clerk, a nervous young man named Henry, apologized profusely. I'm sorry, sir, but our best rooms are reserved for important guests. Jack placed a $20 gold piece on the counter. I believe this makes me an important guest. Henry's eyes widened at the sight of the coin. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. How long will you be staying with us? Indefinitely, Jack replied, and I'll be paying in advance. He placed 4 more gold pieces on the counter. Within minutes, Henry had assigned Jack the hotel's finest suite and was personally carrying his saddlebags upstairs. Word of the wealthy stranger spread quickly through the hotel, and by noon, half the town knew that a man with serious money had arrived in Cedar Ridge. Jack's next stop was the bank, where he requested a meeting with Mayor Caldwell. The mayor, a portly man in his 50s with carefully waxed mustache, received him in his private office with obvious curiosity. Mr. Morrison, isn't it? Mayor Caldwell said, extending his hand. I understand you're new to our community. What brings you to Cedar Ridge? Jack settled into the offered chair and studied the mayor with calculating eyes. Business opportunities, Mr. Caldwell. I'm always looking for promising investments, and I've heard interesting things about this area. Mayor Caldwell's interest sharpened noticeably. What kind of business opportunities? Various kinds. Mining, cattle, real estate. I understand the silver boom has ended, but that often creates opportunities for those with vision and capital. Indeed it does, the mayor agreed. Perhaps you'd like to join me for dinner tonight? I'd be happy to discuss some possibilities with you. I appreciate the invitation, but I'm afraid I have other commitments this evening, Jack replied smoothly. However, I would like to discuss one matter with you now, if you don't mind. Of course. What can I help you with? Jack's expression became serious. I've hired a local woman to handle my domestic needs, laundry, mending, that sort of thing. Her name is Sarah Mitchell. I understand there have been some rumors about Miss Mitchell in your community. Mayor Caldwell's friendly demeanor cooled noticeably. Ah, yes. Miss Mitchell. I'm afraid she's something of a troubled young woman. She's made some serious accusations against my son that have caused considerable distress to our family. Is that so? Jack replied mildly. Well, I've found her to be honest and hardworking. I hope her association with me won't cause problems for either of us. The mayor forced a smile. Of course not, Mr. Morrison. You're certainly free to hire whomever you choose. Though I might suggest there are other women in town who would be more suitable for a gentleman of your obvious refinement. Jack stood. I appreciate your concern, but I'm satisfied with my choice. Miss Mitchell will be working for me exclusively, and I consider her to be under my protection. I trust that won't be a problem for anyone in your community. Mayor Caldwell's smile became strained. Naturally not, though I hope Miss Mitchell hasn't filled your ears with any of her unfortunate stories. Miss Mitchell has been completely professional in all our dealings, Jack replied, as I expect everyone in this town to be. After leaving the bank, Jack made stops at several other businesses, introducing himself and making it clear that he was a man of substantial means looking for investment opportunities. At each stop, he casually mentioned that Sarah Mitchell was working for him and that he considered her an employee worthy of respect. The reaction was immediate and telling. Those who were firmly in the Caldwell camp became noticeably cooler when Sarah's name was mentioned. Others seemed relieved to hear that someone was standing up for the young woman they had secretly believed was being treated unfairly. By the time Jack returned to Sarah's cabin that evening, the news of his arrival and his defense of Sarah had spread throughout Cedar Ridge. Sarah was waiting anxiously for his return, having heard from neighbors that he had been asking questions about her around town. "How did it go?" she asked as Jack settled into the chair by the fire that was already becoming his usual spot. "About as expected," Jack replied. "I made it clear to several key people that you're working for me and that I expect you to be treated with respect." The reactions were quite illuminating. "What do you mean?" Jack smiled grimly. "Let's just say that the battle lines are becoming clearer. Some people in this town are ready to see justice done, but they've been afraid to speak up because of the Caldwell's influence. Others are so deep in the Caldwell's pockets that they'll never change sides." Tommy looked up from the book he was reading. "Are you going to fight them, Mr. Morrison? Like in the stories?" Jack's expression grew serious. "Not with guns, son. There are better ways to fight bullies than violence. Sometimes the pen is mightier than the sword, and sometimes money talks louder than threats." Over the next few days, Jack established a routine. Each morning he would spend time at Sarah's cabin, bringing work for her to do and discussing his observations about the town. Then he would ride into Cedar Ridge to conduct business and gather information. Sarah was amazed by the quality and quantity of work Jack brought her. He seemed to have an endless supply of fine clothes that needed cleaning and mending, and he paid her exactly what he had promised, always in gold coins that made her small savings grow substantially for the first time in her life. More importantly, Jack's presence was beginning to change how people treated Sarah. When she went to the general store, the clerk no longer charged her inflated prices. When she walked down Main Street, fewer people turned away from her. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a start. However, the Caldwells were not pleased with these developments. James had been furious when he learned that the stranger who had interfered with his plans was not only staying in town, but was actively protecting Sarah. Mayor Caldwell was concerned about the potential threat to his political power, especially with an election approaching. The situation came to a head 1 week after Jack's arrival. Sarah was returning from the general store when she was intercepted by Mrs. Caldwell, the mayor's wife, and 2 other prominent women in the town, Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house and Mrs. Jameson, the banker's wife. "Sarah Mitchell," Mrs. Caldwell said in a voice dripping with false concern, "I feel it's my duty as a Christian woman to warn you about the path you're taking." Sarah stopped, clutching her bag of supplies. "What path is that, Mrs. Caldwell?" "This association with that Morrison man," Mrs. Henderson chimed in. "It's not proper for a young, unmarried woman to be spending so much time alone with a strange man." "I'm working for him," Sarah replied firmly. "It's honest work, and it's helping me support my brother." Mrs. Jameson shook her head sadly. "My dear, surely you can see how this looks. A woman of questionable reputation, working alone with a wealthy bachelor. People are beginning to talk." Sarah felt her temper rising. "People have been talking about me for weeks, Mrs. Jameson. At least now, they have something real to talk about instead of the lies your friends have been spreading. Mrs. Caldwell's facade of concern dropped slightly. Those aren't lies, young lady. My son told us exactly what happened behind the church, and his version is quite different from yours. Your son is a liar and a drunk, Sarah said, her patience finally exhausted. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise just to keep the peace. Mrs. Henderson gasped. How dare you speak about James that way? He's one of the finest young men in this community. If James Caldwell is one of the finest young men in this community, then this community has serious problems, Sarah replied. At that moment, Jack appeared around the corner, having obviously heard the raised voices. He took in the situation at a glance and moved to stand beside Sarah. Ladies, he said with the tip of his hat. Beautiful afternoon, isn't it? Mrs. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Mr. Morrison, how convenient that you should appear just now. Jack smiled. I was just coming to check on Miss Mitchell's progress with my laundry. She does excellent work, very thorough and professional. I'm sure she does, Mrs. Henderson said with obvious skepticism. Jack's smile grew cooler. I'm glad you agree. Miss Mitchell has proven to be exactly the kind of honest, hardworking person I hope to find in Cedar Ridge. It speaks well of your community that it produced such a fine young woman. Mrs. Jameson cleared her throat. Mr. Morrison, surely a man of your background and education can see the impropriety of this arrangement. A single woman, alone with a bachelor, in such intimate circumstances. Jack's eyebrows rose. Intimate circumstances? I'm afraid I don't understand. Miss Mitchell does my laundry and mending at her own home during daylight hours, often with her younger brother present. If you find something improper about clean clothes and mended shirts, perhaps the problem lies with your imagination rather than with Miss Mitchell's conduct. Mrs. Caldwell's face flushed red. Mr. Morrison, you're a stranger here. You don't understand the full situation with this person. Jack's voice became dangerously quiet. Madam, I understand the situation perfectly. I understand that Miss Mitchell is a decent young woman trying to support herself and her brother through honest work. I understand that she has been subjected to a campaign of lies and intimidation by people who should know better. And I understand that some folks in this town seem to think their opinions about my business arrangements matter more than they actually do. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. Now see here, Mr. Morrison. No, you see here. Jack interrupted, his voice still quiet, but with an edge that made all three women take a step back. Miss Mitchell is under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to discuss it with me directly. Anyone who continues to spread lies about her will find themselves dealing with consequences they might not enjoy. Mrs. Caldwell drew herself up to her full height. Are you threatening us, Mr. Morrison? Jack smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Ma'am, I don't make threats. I make promises. And I promise you that Miss Mitchell will be treated with the respect she deserves, or there will be consequences for those who fail to do so. The three women exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to respond to this direct challenge to their authority. My husband will hear about this, Mrs. Caldwell said finally. I'm counting on it, Jack replied. Please give Mayor Caldwell my regards, and let him know that I'm looking forward to our next conversation. After the women hurried away, Sarah turned to Jack with tears in her eyes. Thank you for standing up for me, but you don't understand what you've done. Those women control the social life of this town. They can make things very difficult for you. Jack took her arm gently and began walking toward her cabin. Sarah, let me tell you something about bullies. They only have the power you give them. Those women just learned that their usual tactics won't work on me, and they don't know what to do about it. But they'll find a way to retaliate. They always do. Jack's smile was confident. Let them try. I've been dealing with bullies my whole life, and I've learned that the best defense is a good offense. Mrs. Caldwell just gave me exactly the opening I've been waiting for. What do you mean? You'll see, Jack replied mysteriously. But I promise you this, by the time I'm finished with the Caldwells, they'll be begging to leave you alone. That evening, as they sat by the fire in Sarah's cabin, Jack began to reveal more about his background and his plans for Cedar Ridge. What Sarah learned would change everything she thought she knew about her mysterious protector, and would set in motion events that would transform the town forever. "Sarah," Jack said seriously, "there's something I need to tell you about why I'm really here." Sarah set down her mending and looked at Jack with curiosity mixed with apprehension. Over the past week, she had grown comfortable with the mysterious stranger who had become such an important part of her and Tommy's lives, but she had always sensed there was more to his story than he was telling. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Jack was silent for a moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that Sarah had never heard before. "My name is Jack Morrison, as I told you. But what I didn't tell you is that I'm not just a wandering businessman looking for opportunities. I'm here on behalf of the Colorado Territorial Mining Commission." Sarah felt her heart skip. The Mining Commission was a powerful government body that regulated mining operations throughout the territory. They had the authority to investigate fraud, revoke mining claims, and even shut down entire operations. "I don't understand," Sarah said. "I thought the silver was played out here. Why would the Mining Commission be interested in Cedar Ridge?" Jack reached into his coat and pulled out an official-looking document. "Because someone has been filing false reports about the mineral content of this area. According to the records in Denver, the mines around Cedar Ridge are still producing significant amounts of silver. But according to what I've seen since I arrived, those same mines have been closed for months." Tommy, who had been listening from his bed in the back room, crept closer to hear the conversation better. "Someone has been claiming production that doesn't exist," Jack continued. "They've been receiving government subsidies and tax breaks based on fraudulent reports. The commission sent me here to investigate." Sarah's mind raced. Mayor Caldwell. He owned interests in several of the mines before they closed. Jack nodded grimly. Mayor Caldwell, along with 2 associates in Denver, have been collecting federal money from mining operations that shut down 6 months ago. They've stolen over $40,000 from the territorial government. The sum was staggering. $40,000 was more money than most people in Cedar Ridge would see in their entire lifetimes. "But why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "And what does it have to do with what happened to me?" Jack's expression grew serious. "Because my investigation led me to discover something else. Mayor Caldwell isn't just stealing from the government. He's been systematically taking over this entire town through predatory lending and false foreclosures. He's been deliberately driving people into debt so he can seize their properties." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Ow! Think about it," Jack said. "When a mine started to decline, people needed loans to survive. Mayor Caldwell, as the banker, was the only source of credit in town. But instead of helping people through a difficult time, he's been charging excessive interest rates and calling in loans early. When people can't pay, he forecloses and takes their property. That's legal, though, isn't it?" Sarah asked, though the thought made her sick. "Legal, yes. But not when you're using fraudulent government money to finance the scheme. Caldwell has been using the stolen mining subsidies to buy up properties, then reselling them to associates in Denver at inflated prices. It's a complex fraud that reaches all the way to the territorial capital." Tommy had crept close enough now that he was sitting on the floor near Sarah's chair, his eyes wide with fascination and fear. "So the reason Mayor Caldwell has so much power in this town," Sarah began, "is because he's been systematically stealing it," Jack finished. "And anyone who might expose his operation becomes a threat that needs to be eliminated." Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. "That's why James attacked me. Not because I rejected his proposal, but because you're smart enough and honest enough to piece together what's been happening," Jack said. "Think about it, Sarah. Your father was a mine foreman. He would have known about the production levels. He would have known the mines were playing out. If he had lived, he might have started asking questions about why the government was still sending subsidy money." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "You think they kill my parents?" Jack held up a cautioning hand. "I don't have proof of that. Their wagon accident might have been just that, an accident. But the timing is suspicious. Your parents died just 2 weeks after your father had a public argument with Mayor Caldwell about the mine closures. Tommy had gone pale. Someone murdered Ma and Pa. We don't know that for certain, son, Jack said gently. But we're going to find out. That's part of why I'm here. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Jack was telling her. If all this is true, then James didn't just attack me because I rejected him. He attacked me because I'm a threat to their entire operation. That's right. And that's why your life has been in danger from the moment you reported what James did to you. If they can destroy your reputation completely, discredit you as a witness, then you can never testify against them if their fraud is discovered. But you discovered it anyway, Sarah pointed out. Jack smiled grimly. I discovered the financial fraud, yes. But I still need proof of the local corruption. I need evidence that Mayor Caldwell has been systematically stealing properties and intimidating anyone who might expose him. How can I help? Sarah asked without hesitation. Jack studied her face. Are you sure you want to be involved in this? It could be dangerous. These people have already shown they're willing to use violence to protect their secrets. Sarah thought about everything she and Tommy had endured over the past few weeks. The lies, the isolation, the constant fear. She thought about her parents and about all the other families in town who had lost their homes and businesses to Mayor Caldwell's predatory schemes. Mr. Morrison, Jack, these people destroyed my family and tried to destroy me. If I can help stop them, I want to do it. Jack nodded slowly. All right, but we have to be very careful. What I'm going to ask you to do will put you in considerable danger. Over the next hour, Jack outlined his plan. Sarah would continue working for him, but she would also begin quietly gathering information from other townspeople who had been victims of Mayor Caldwell's schemes. Jack would provide her with a list of specific questions to ask and particular documents to look for. The key is to make it seem natural, Jack explained. You're a seamstress who goes into people's homes. You see their personal situations. If you ask the right questions in the right way, people will tell you things they wouldn't tell a federal investigator. Tommy had been listening to everything with growing excitement. What about me? Can I help too? Jack considered the boy seriously. Actually, yes. Children hear things that adults don't realize they're saying. You could be very helpful, but only if you promise to be extremely careful and only talk to people we know are safe. Tommy nodded eagerly. I promise. I want to help catch the people who might have hurt Ma and Pa. Sarah felt a surge of protective fear for her brother. Jack, I don't want Tommy involved in anything dangerous. Neither do I, Jack assured her. Tommy's job would just be to listen and remember. He wouldn't have to do anything risky. They spent the rest of the evening planning their approach. Jack would continue his role as a wealthy investor, while gradually gathering evidence of the financial fraud. Sarah would begin reaching out to other townspeople who had lost property or businesses to Mayor Caldwell. Tommy would listen for any conversations about the mayor or his business dealings. The next morning, Sarah began her new role as an investigator. Her first stop was the home of Mrs. Peterson, an elderly widow whose husband had died the previous year. Mrs. Peterson had been forced to sell her house to Mayor Caldwell and now lived in a small room above the bakery. Mrs. Peterson, Sarah said as she delivered the woman's weekly laundry, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've been wondering about what happened with your house. I know it's not my business, but with Tommy and me struggling so much, I worry about ending up in the same situation. Mrs. Peterson's face crumpled. Oh, Sarah, it was terrible. After my Henry died, I had some debts from his medical care. Mayor Caldwell said he could help me by loaning me money to pay them off. But the interest was so high, and when I couldn't make the payments, he said I had to sell the house to cover the loan. How much was the loan? Sarah asked gently. $300. But with the interest and fees, he said I owed over $800 when he foreclosed. The house sold for $1,200, but he said the extra money had to go to cover his legal costs. Sarah felt sick. Mrs. Peterson's house had been worth at least $1,500, and Mayor Caldwell had essentially stolen it for a fraction of its value. Where did the money for the loan come from? Sarah asked. I mean, did Mayor Caldwell use his own money, or was it from the bank? Mrs. Peterson looked confused. I don't know, dear. Why would that matter? Sarah realized she needed to be more careful with her questions. I just wondered if there might be different lending sources in town. I may need a loan myself someday. Over the next few days, Sarah visited several other families who had lost property to Mayor Caldwell. The pattern was always the same. People in desperate situations were offered loans with terms they couldn't possibly meet, then foreclosed on when they inevitably defaulted. Meanwhile, Jack was conducting his own investigation. He had managed to gain access to some of Mayor Caldwell's financial records by posing as a potential investor in the mayor's development schemes. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions. Sarah, Jack said one evening as they sat by the fire, I've found documented proof that Mayor Caldwell has been using federal mining subsidies to finance his property acquisitions. I have copies of bank records showing deposits of government money going directly into loans that were used to foreclose on local properties. That's enough evidence to convict him, isn't it? Sarah asked hopefully. Jack shook his head. It's enough to prove the financial fraud, but I still need evidence of the intimidation and violence. The territorial authorities need to see that this wasn't just a white-collar crime, but a systematic campaign of threats and possibly even murder. What kind of evidence? Witness statements about threats and violence. Documentation of the intimidation campaign against you. Anything that shows a pattern of using fear to silence potential witnesses. Sarah thought about this. What about Dr. Peterson? He treated me after James attacked me. He saw the bruises and heard my story. And he's treated other people who were hurt under suspicious circumstances. Jack's eyes lit up. That's exactly what we need. Do you think he would be willing to testify? I think so. Dr. Peterson is one of the few people in town who doesn't owe Mayor Caldwell money. And he's been upset about some of the injuries he's treated lately. The next day, Sarah arranged to meet with Dr. Peterson at his office. She told him the truth about Jack's real purpose in Cedar Ridge and asked for his help in exposing Mayor Caldwell's crimes. Dr. Peterson, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and steady hands, listened to Sarah's story with growing anger. I suspected something like this was happening, he said finally. I've treated too many accidents lately. People who fell downstairs, walked into doors, had horses kick them. Always people who had been asking questions about their loan terms or foreclosure proceedings. Would you be willing to testify about what you've seen? Sarah asked. Dr. Peterson was quiet for a moment. Miss Mitchell, I took an oath to do no harm and to help people heal. I can't stand by and let Mayor Caldwell continue hurting innocent folks. Yes, I'll testify, and I'll provide medical records to support my testimony. That evening, Sarah returned to her cabin with more hope than she had felt in months. But her optimism was short-lived. When she opened her door, she found Tommy sitting at the kitchen table with a black eye and a split lip. Tommy, Sarah rushed to her brother. What happened? It was James Caldwell and his friends, Tommy said, trying not to cry. They cornered me behind the school and said I'd better tell you to stop asking questions around town. Sarah felt rage building in her chest. Did they say anything else? Tommy nodded. James said that if you don't mind your own business, something bad is going to happen to you. He said the same thing that happened to Ma, and Pa could happen to you too. Sarah's blood ran cold. That sounded very much like a confession that her parents' death had not been an accident. When Jack arrived a few minutes later and saw Tommy's injuries, his face went dark with fury. Who did this? James Caldwell, Sarah replied. And Jack, he as much as admitted that my parents were murdered. Jack knelt down beside Tommy and examined his injuries with gentle hands. Son, I'm sorry this happened to you, but you've just given us the evidence we needed. James Caldwell made a fatal mistake by threatening you and by admitting knowledge of your parents' death. What do you mean? Sarah asked. Jack's smile was grim and determined. I mean, it's time to bring the full weight of the federal government down on Mayor Caldwell and his operation. Tommy's beating and James's threats are the proof we need that this conspiracy involves violence and intimidation. What happens now? Now I sent a telegraph to Denver requesting immediate backup. Within a week, this town will be crawling with federal marshals, territorial investigators, and territorial prosecutors. Mayor Caldwell's reign of terror is about to come to an end. As Jack prepared his reports that night, Sarah tended to Tommy's injuries and marveled at how much their lives had changed. A week ago, they had been helpless victims of a corrupt system. Now they were key witnesses in a federal investigation that would bring justice not only to them, but to all the families who had been destroyed by Mayor Caldwell's greed. But Sarah also knew that the most dangerous part of their ordeal was just beginning. Cornered animals were always the most vicious, and Mayor Caldwell would not go down without a fight. The response to Jack's telegraph came faster than anyone expected. Within 3 days, a special train arrived in Cedar Ridge carrying 5 federal marshals, 2 territorial prosecutors, and an investigative team from the Colorado Territorial Mining Commission. The sudden appearance of so many federal officials sent shockwaves through the small town. Mayor Caldwell tried to maintain his composure, but Sarah could see the fear in his eyes when she encountered him on Main Street. He no longer looked like the powerful, confident man who had controlled Cedar Ridge for so long. Instead, he appeared haggard and desperate, constantly looking over his shoulder as if expecting arrest at any moment. Jack had warned Sarah that the next few days would be crucial but dangerous. Caldwell knows his time is running out, he explained as they sat in her cabin, now under the protection of 2 federal marshals stationed outside. Desperate men do desperate things. We need to be extremely careful. The investigation moved with impressive speed. The federal team had brought warrants to search Mayor Caldwell's office, his home, and all of his business records. Within hours, they had uncovered a mountain of evidence documenting the fraudulent mining reports, the predatory lending schemes, and the systematic theft of federal subsidies. Dr. Peterson proved to be a crucial witness. His medical records showed a clear pattern of suspicious injuries among people who had challenged Mayor Caldwell's business practices. When combined with his testimony about the threats and intimidation he had witnessed, it painted a picture of a man who had used violence as a routine tool of control. Sarah found herself spending long hours being interviewed by the territorial prosecutors. They were particularly interested in her account of James Caldwell's attack and the subsequent campaign of lies and intimidation. "Miss Mitchell," said Prosecutor Williams, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, "your testimony is crucial to establishing the pattern of violence and intimidation that supported the financial fraud. But I want you to understand that testifying will make you a target for retaliation." "Understand," Sarah replied, "but I can't let them continue hurting innocent people. Besides, they've already made me a target. At least now I have protection." Prosecutor Williams nodded approvingly. "We also want to investigate the death of your parents. James Caldwell's threat to your brother suggests they may have been murdered to silence your father's knowledge of the mining fraud." Sarah felt a mixture of hope and dread. She wanted justice for her parents, but she also feared what they might discover. The breakthrough came on the 4th day of the investigation. One of the federal marshals, following up on Tommy's account of his beating, arrested James Caldwell for assault on a minor. Under questioning, and faced with multiple federal charges including his role in the fraudulent mining scheme, James broke down and confessed to far more than anyone expected. Jack brought the news to Sarah that evening, his face grim with mixed emotions. "James has confessed to everything," he said without preamble. "The mining fraud, the intimidation campaign, the predatory lending, and the murder of your parents." Sarah felt the world spin around her. Even though she had suspected the truth, hearing it confirmed was devastating. "Ow!" Jack sat down beside her and took her hand. "According to James's confession, your father had discovered discrepancies in the mining reports. He was planning to report them to the territorial authorities. Mayor Caldwell ordered James and Pete Rawlings to discourage your father from making trouble, but they killed him instead. They sabotaged your parents' wagon, loosened the wheel so it would come off on the steep hill outside town. They didn't expect your mother to be with him that day. Jack's voice was filled with controlled anger. "James says it was supposed to look like an accident, and they never meant for your mother to die." Sarah began to cry, not just from grief, but from a strange sense of relief. For months, she had felt somehow responsible for not being able to prevent her parents' death. Now she knew there was nothing she could have done. Tommy, who had been listening from his usual spot near the fire, spoke up quietly. "So Ma and Pa died because they were trying to do the right thing?" Jack nodded. "Your father was an honest man who couldn't stand by and watch the government be defrauded. Your mother died because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were both heroes, son." The next few days brought a whirlwind of arrests and revelations. Mayor Caldwell was charged with fraud, conspiracy, murder, and a dozen other crimes. James Caldwell and Pete Rawlings were charged with murder and conspiracy. Dale Murphy, the third member of James's gang, was arrested for assault and intimidation. But the investigation revealed that the corruption extended far beyond Cedar Ridge. Mayor Caldwell's associates in Denver included a territorial legislator, 2 mining officials, and several prominent businessmen. The entire network was systematically exposed and dismantled. For Sarah, the most satisfying moment came when Mrs. Caldwell, Mrs. Henderson, and Mrs. Jameson were forced to publicly apologize for their role in spreading lies about her character. The apologies were part of a settlement agreement that also required them to make financial restitution to Sarah for the damage to her reputation and livelihood. "I don't need their apologies," Sarah told Jack as they watched the 3 women awkwardly deliver their public statements in front of the hotel. "But I want everyone in town to hear them admit they were wrong." Jack smiled. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment, it's about setting the record straight. With Mayor Caldwell in federal custody, the town needed new leadership. A special election was called, and, to everyone's surprise, Dr. Peterson was elected as the new mayor. His first official act was to establish a fund to help families recover properties that had been fraudulently foreclosed. "Miss Mitchell, Dr. Peterson said when he visited Sarah's cabin after his election, the town owes you and your family a tremendous debt. If you hadn't had the courage to tell the truth about James Caldwell, this corruption might have continued for years." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the change in how people treated her. Where once she had been shunned and whispered about, now she was praised as a hero. Children who had been forbidden to speak to her now waved enthusiastically when they saw her on the street. But perhaps the most significant change was in her relationship with Jack. As the investigation wound down and the immediate danger passed, Sarah found herself wondering what would happen next. Jack had completed his mission for the territorial government, but he showed no signs of leaving Cedar Ridge. One evening, as they sat on the front porch of Sarah's cabin watching the sunset, she finally asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Jack, what happens now? With your investigation finished, I suppose you'll be moving on to your next assignment." Jack was quiet for a moment, then turned to look at her directly. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you weeks ago." Sarah felt her heart skip. "What is it?" "I'm not just a territorial investigator. I'm also a partner in the Morrison Mining Company, one of the largest mining operations in Montana. I came to Cedar Ridge not just to investigate fraud, but because my company was considering purchasing mining rights in this area." Sarah stared at him in shock. "You mean you're wealthy?" "Yes, very. The Morrison Mining Company has made me a rich man. But more importantly, I found something in Cedar Ridge that I value far more than silver or gold." "What's that?" Jack took her hand. "I found a woman of incredible courage and integrity. A woman who stood up for the truth, even when it cost her everything. A woman who has made me believe in the possibility of building a life based on something more meaningful than just business success." Sarah's heart was pounding. "What are you saying, Jack?" "I'm saying that I want to stay in Cedar Ridge. I want to invest in rebuilding this community, and I want to do it with you by my side." Jack's voice became serious. "Sarah, I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "Jack, I don't know what to say. We've known each other such a short time, and with everything that's happened. I know it seems sudden, Jack said gently, but sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that feel right in your heart, regardless of what logic tells you. I love you, Sarah. I love your courage, your integrity, your determination to protect your brother, and do the right thing no matter what it costs you. Sarah looked at this man who had appeared out of a blizzard like a hero from a story, who had risked his own safety to protect her, who had helped bring justice to her family and her community. She thought about the life he was offering, not just financial security, but partnership with someone who shared her values and her commitment to justice. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Jack's face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into his arms for a kiss that tasted of hope and new beginnings. Tommy, who had been pretending to read his book while actually listening to every word, jumped up from his chair. Does this mean Jack is going to be my brother now? Jack grinned and ruffled Tommy's hair. It means I'm going to be your family, son. And it means you're going to help me take care of your sister for the rest of our lives. Over the next few weeks, as wedding plans were made and arrangements were finalized for Jack's business investments in the area, Sarah marveled at how completely her life had changed. She had gone from being a despised outcast to being engaged to one of the most respected and wealthy men in the territory. But more than that, she had found justice for her parents, safety for her brother, and love for herself. The blizzard that had seemed like such a disaster had actually brought her everything she had never dared to hope for. The wedding was planned for the following month, and already the entire town was preparing for what promised to be the social event of the decade. Sarah had gone from being the most reviled woman in Cedar Ridge to being its most celebrated citizen, all because she had had the courage to tell the truth, and a mysterious stranger had had the courage to believe her. As she stood in her small cabin, now filled with gifts from townspeople who wanted to make amends for their treatment of her, Sarah reflected on the lessons she had learned. Sometimes the darkest storms brought the greatest blessings. Sometimes standing up for truth required risking everything. And sometimes the help you needed arrived in the most unexpected form at exactly the right moment. She looked out the window at the mountains where snow still capped the peaks, remembering the night when Jack had first appeared out of the blizzard to save her. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but it had been less than 2 months. 2 months that had changed everything. Sarah smiled and began preparing for her future, knowing that whatever storms life might bring, she would never have to face them alone again. The morning of Sarah's wedding dawned clear and bright, with golden sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers from the meadows surrounding Cedar Ridge. It was the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Sarah stood before the mirror in her small bedroom, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. The wedding dress had been a gift from Jack, a beautiful creation of ivory silk and delicate